Hello, everyone, and welcome to Market Talks. I'm Ray Salmon, head of markets at Cointelegraph. Here on the show, we discuss the latest in what's shaping markets with valuable insights from industry traders, leaders, and influencers. On this week's episode of Market Talks, we have Luke Broyles, an investor, Bitcoiner, businessman, and filmmaker. As a 23-year-old investor, critical thinker, and hardcore Bitcoin advocate, he spends much of his time perfecting his Bitcoin thesis and posting educational content on his YouTube and Twitter. Hey,
Hello.
Luke, thanks for coming on to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on. Very nice invite for you. Thank you.
Yeah, it should be a good chat. I just came across, I don't know how, Twitter or X, as we now call it, is much different than it was before, but the algorithm just pushes things your way based off what it thinks your interests might be. And I had seen a tweet from you about Bitcoin miners and like Bitcoin scarcity. So that led me to click on your profile and see that you're a huge advocate of Bitcoin, and your account is growing quite rapidly. So I wanted to know, what's your background and how did you find Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, my background, I'm pretty young, so I don't have a lot of experience in the professional finance world, but my original background was in the filmmaking world, and I've been growing in the finance world, let's say, for the last 6 years, and slowly transitioned from stocks into real estate. And 2020 was a major catalyst for me, as well as many other people that are currently in Bitcoin. As I often joke with people, I in 2020 came to the realization that the bond market was either broken or probably breaking. And so mid to late 2020, I started researching, okay, what do I do to prepare for that? Eventually go down the monetary history route. And I've always been a huge fan of history. A lot of my films back in the day were history. I love reading about history films. And so monetary history, I really dove deep into that in 2020, 2021. And here I am today, where basically my whole thesis is that we are beginning and already in a series of monetary wars around the world. And probably those are going to continue. And of all the possible victors, I think that the most probable victor is going to be Bitcoin. And so I think that it is increasingly important for people to get a Bitcoin allocation. So 2023, I started posting my thoughts online, and much to my shock and surprise, people really enjoyed it, because who's going to care about this 24-year-old that read, a bunch of history and has many ramblings about Bitcoin? But people really enjoyed it and invited me on their shows generously, just like you have, and that's where I am today.
What's your allocation strategy for Bitcoin, and how do you stomach the volatility?
I do not own bonds. I have sold off 97% of my stocks over the last 3 years. I'm selling off the last 3% this week, actually, so it's funny you ask that. And so yeah, by the end of the week, the only 3 assets I will own will be US dollars, cash, aka the best political currency in the world. Second, real estate, and third, Bitcoin, and that's it. And I sleep better now than I did with a diversified portfolio, because I believe this is lower risk. I think Bitcoin is lower risk than those assets, and sometimes I wonder, why don't I just sell off all my dollars and all my real estate for Bitcoin and lower my risk even more?
Maybe at a future date. So yesterday we got some big news with Grayscale having their victory with their Bitcoin ETF application against the SEC. Now they're allowed to get in line and wait for an approval if it ever happens, just like every other fund that is chasing after a spot Bitcoin ETF. So does this news alter your view on Bitcoin price in the short term?
Well, no, it doesn't alter my view in Bitcoin price in the short term, because I don't have a view. I think in the next 12 months, Bitcoin could go to $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, close to new all-time highs, or I think it could go to $15,000, $20,000. I really don't know. There's a huge number of possible positive catalysts that could occur that have massive candles upwards in very short order, and there's also a large number of negative catalysts that could force it down in rapid short order. And so I inherently can't predict that, and I don't think anyone should. I don't trade. I don't encourage people to trade, because you're not trading logic. You are inherently trading unreasonableness. It is determining the price of money via the Federal Reserve is inherently unreasonable. You're projecting human emotion onto a chart and trying to profit off that. And so do people do that successfully? Yes, and I know many of them actually. But you have to get so deep and so good at predicting human emotion that it's really difficult in my view. So I am a long-term person, and I don't typically speculate on short-term swings. But will ETFs eventually come to Bitcoin? Absolutely. Will that send Bitcoin to six figures and perhaps even higher? Yeah, absolutely. Bank of America has issued reports in the past about how the multiplier effect is 118 or 100 or so to 1. So if we have a few $1 billion that's allocated to Bitcoin, it could be sent up to absurd levels. I mean, the biggest institutional buyer that we know of right now is Michael Saylor. And, obviously he's a billionaire, and so he's, a big shot in the world. But compared to asset managers that manage hundreds of billions or trillions, like all it takes, and see, this is what people don't understand. They think when I talk about $10 million Bitcoin, that's a hyper-Bitcoinization, massive world-changing thing. It's like, no, all it takes is a few percent allocation from the world's largest investors combined with an increasing conviction of current holders and coming holders that this is going to have value in the future. I mean, there is simply not enough supply, and our brains are simply not going to understand what that does to price, because we've never had an asset in the history of the world that has finite supply. And so this exchange rate in terms of everything else is not going to behave like anything else in human history. And people online can say that that's just a bunch of hype, but it's the truth. We can make more gold, we can make more real estate, we can make more stocks, we can make more political currency, we can make more art, we can make more oil, we can make more silver, copper, and everything else in the world. We don't know how to make more Bitcoin. And so inherently, basic supply and demand, people, is that price is going to behave differently, and almost certainly to the upside.
So everyone who's interested in Bitcoin as an asset or store of value, or this deflationary currency, they're mainly focused on up only, price going up. When is price going up, and how is price going up? Are there any overlooked bearish catalysts that you think investors should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the housing market has never been this overvalued. The stock market has never been this overvalued. I mean, every market is absurdly overvalued, including healthcare, including education, including everything else. And like I tell people, is that it has to become more overvalued. It has to get worse. Okay, everything is overvalued, nothing makes sense, and everything should crash. Everything should. I admit that. Like, that's the logical thing that's going to happen. However, we don't want to deal with it. Politicians don't want to deal with it. Lawyers don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with it as a real estate investor. There is no person in our modern society, from the top down, from the bottom up, nobody wants logic to return. Nobody wants the credit unwind to happen, even though that's what should happen. And so probably, in my view, what's going to happen is that we will have hints that things are turning back to reality, that things are returning back to reasonability. And because we don't want to deal with that, we will then distort the money a little bit more, a little more corruption in the money, so that we can offset that need of return to reality back to the currency. We'll destroy the currency a little bit more for a little bit longer in order to preserve certain markets. And so what are the negative catalysts? Well, I think the main negative catalyst is the argument that everything should probably crash. And it's probably going to. Like I said earlier, with the threat of inflation versus the threat of deflation, right now we're in this period where people were losing faith in the dollar. People were getting really scared that inflation was just going to continue. And so what the Fed has to do is they have to compete ECB and the PBOC to constrain the supply of dollars, to artificially reduce the supply of dollars, so that people will be so scared about asset prices crashing that they hold cash to preserve faith in the credit of the United States and the political currency of the US dollar. So yeah, there's negative catalysts. I mean, 3 of the 4 largest banking failures in American history, adjusted for inflation, happened earlier this year. We have never skyrocketed rates this quickly on percentage terms for Federal Reserve. Like I said before, it seems like that the 40-year bull market for bonds is ending. Bloomberg posted an article just a couple of days ago that this is probably the case. And this is the dilemma we have, that we're going to increasingly have this negative catalyst for the short term that will have a massive credit unwind. But really, that doesn't change my long-term thesis, because what's going to happen? Okay, if we have a credit unwind, of course we're going to print ourselves out of it. The people that think that easy money is over and it's going to be higher for longer forever, those people are insane, because we can't do that. And even if we could do that, we will instead elect someone to replace them that will then do what we want and return easy money. We have to keep doing that. As painful as it is, there's simply no other option. If we have any other option, there'd be revolution tomorrow. So,
do you see any investment value in Ethereum?
Um, I think people can do what they want. I believe Ethereum is a security compared to Bitcoin. Ethereum had 70% pre-mine. Ethereum's been rolled back. Ethereum has had its monetary policy changed multiple times. Proof of stake. People can make the argument that proof of stake has some sort of value, and that's something I've talked about online. How even the U.S. dollar, which both Bitcoin fans and Ethereum fans tend to hate. I mean, we have to be real here. The U.S. dollar is a technological innovation. It is better than barter. That's a fact. But everything has trade-offs. There's no perfect solution. And I think for the US dollar, the trade-offs are significantly worse than the trade-offs with Bitcoin. And with Ethereum, Ethereum makes certain trade-offs. You could argue that those trade-offs are better. You have the blockchain trilemma. Bitcoin made a trade-off of one for the other two, and Ethereum made a different trade-off. You could argue that has value. I would argue it doesn't. So people can do what they want, but I'm here talking about Bitcoin because I think Bitcoin is significantly lower risk than Ethereum, and I think Bitcoin has significantly higher upside than Ethereum. And third, I think whatever innovation is eventually developed on top of Ethereum is probably going to eventually consolidate onto Bitcoin as well. We only have one electric grid, we only have one wheel, we only have one internet. And if we look at the early days of the internet as the best example, there were multiple internets, and yet TCP/IP was the one that won. Why? Because of security. And so to me, security wins every single time. That you don't want to build a house on sticking, rather build it on a rock. And so as far as I can tell, Bitcoin is that cryptographic rock, and everything else is, my general view in altcoins I tell people is that you can do what you want, but best case is that 95% of altcoins are complete scams, and the other 5% probably going to have the utility absorbed by Bitcoin. So that's not the most popular view online, but that's my personal view. If you want to speculate on whatever innovation is going to happen on Ethereum before it transitions to Bitcoin, go for it. Great, do what you want. But for me, that's not my personal strategy.
Right. Some good analogies there. So in your Twitter profile, you identify as a believer in Jesus. How does a Christian support Bitcoin?
Thank you. I appreciate the question because, again, like earlier, I know that I could have a lot more followers and get a lot more views if I didn't talk about my beliefs, but, here we are. Like, I feel like I have to. I can't justify it any other way. But so anyway, I appreciate you asking that because most don't. But there are legitimate concerns there, for Christians and their Christian worldview. They believe strongly in one world currency, revelation, all that. And so what is Bitcoin promising to be? Well, it's aiming to be a global reserve asset and the sole global reserve asset. So that's a factor. What I tell people, though, is that, if we think of Jerome Powell, who is Jerome Powell? Jerome Powell is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. What does the chairman of the Federal Reserve do? He determines the price of money, and the U.S. dollar is roughly 60% of global reserve currencies. And, if we think about it, this is something I often tell people, is that, the president, current president, previous president, whomever, party, color, doesn't matter. The president can basically say whatever he wants. He can say things that are unconstitutional. He can say things that indirectly or directly are supporting totalitarian regimes. The president can say whatever it is, as unpopular as it is, and we will talk about it for 48 hours in the news cycle and forget it. Okay, Jerome Powell can't do that. Jerome Powell has to be so precise in his speech and so articulate that he doesn't do interviews. Like, he rarely does interviews, and whenever he's standing at the podium, the altar of the Federal Reserve, he has to be precisely on script. And so so I say that to emphasize whose words matter more. In many ways, I think that the U.S. dollar is much closer to that revelation description of a one world currency than Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's whole design, the only way Bitcoin becomes global reserve currency is if no human or no board of humans gains control of it. If a board of humans does, then Bitcoin dies. Compared to our current system, in many ways, there are trade-offs, and I think the current trade-off is much closer to that revelation description of a one world currency where a single individual is controlling everyone. And just for clarification, I'm not saying Jerome Powell's the Antichrist. Okay, some people sometimes think that's what I mean. Mm-hmm. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't have a vendetta against Powell, Bernanke, Yellen, or anyone else, and I make that very clear. That if I was in their position, I was in their chair, I'd have to do the same thing. When you have a seat that powerful, that your chair controls 60% of the world's money, at that point, the power is so great that you basically don't have any free will. Like, the power acts on you. You can no longer act on the power. Powell's stuck. No matter what he does, he's going to cause some sort of destruction. because the power is so great. So anyway, regarding the one world currency, I just wanted to make that point. But to your larger question of how does a Christian support it? Well, I look back at history. If we look at the first half of the 20th century, at all various conflicts, I think you can make a very easy argument that a significant portion, and maybe the majority, of the conflicts of the first half of the 20th century were aided by or escalated by monetary wars that eventually bubbled up into political conflicts. And so, often makes you think, how much severely less would that conflict have been if it was impossible for governments to print money? Because that's what happened. Look at Japan's atrocities, Germany's atrocities, the trench warfare of World War I. All these conflicts were extended, magnified, and again, arguably caused by government's ability to print currency, harvest wealth from local populations via tyranny or outside populations via war to create more bullets and guns, to extend the war. And so, if we look at those couple decades there, roughly 250 million people died either from war, famine, or revolution. And so if we look at today, it's like, there are clear cycles. What if this monetary war continues and bubbles up into political wars in the coming years and decades? Is it reasonable that we could be looking at tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, dead, wars, revolutions, and famines? Forget the nukes, forget World War III, all that. Just consider that 250 million last time, and we have significantly stronger weapons today and significantly more people on the planet today. To me, that's a major concern. And so what I tell people is that in the same way that a Christian missionary can go to the developing world and aid via medical benefit or education or clean water, all those are wonderful things and we need them. In the same way, I think we need these sort of monetary missionaries. In a way, as pretentious as it might sound, I do believe it, that the Bitcoiners out there today we're essentially fighting World War III before it begins in a very real way. I'm doing everything I can to advance this technology that I believe reduces the probability of famines, wars, and revolutions in the coming decades, and then beyond that as well. So I believe, as a Christian, I can do my best to aid that cause, both for today and the future. I'm mostly talking about the future right now, but it's also true for today. It's helping people today. 7 out of the 10 fastest adopting nations in the world are developing nations. For 2.5 billion people are under authoritarian rule. Only 1.5 billion people in the world have property rights. And so to me, that's very exciting. That's taken us 4,000 years to get to 1.5 billion people with property rights. And those property rights aren't even really guaranteed because they're guaranteed by governments, and governments tend to become tyrannical, over time, especially in a longer time horizon. And so that's an amazing thought. What if this technology, what if Bitcoin could triple that number of people with property rights in just the next 30, 40 years? That's a massive accomplishment. So again, from the extreme pessimism side of preventing World War III and the extreme positive side of tripling the number of humans that have access to property rights, in both ways, I think the case is very strong for Christians to support Bitcoin.
Very well said. I think Bitcoin as a technology opened doors for people. It creates bridges for people to traverse across. It allows for people who don't have infrastructure, financial infrastructure in their country to access it. So it's an open door rather than a closed door, and it's not centralized, and it's not like the IMF or World Bank where it has exploitative conditions, right? That are kind of must be a forced handshake in order for you to have access to the technology. And I think that those are things that Christ would stand for, because he was a pacifist and not exploiting, not into exploitation or overtaxation of the poor or anything like that. So it's a unique perspective. I think Bitcoin is also a conduit of goodwill. And it opens the door to self-empowerment in terms of just like being financially self-sovereign, but also learning more about finance, because a lot of people that I've spoken to that got into Bitcoin that didn't come from traditional finance had literally no knowledge. They were illiterate financially beyond just like saving or do my 401k or whatever. But most people have a very infantile kind of understanding of stocks and markets and economics and how it impacts them daily, and actually how easy it is to interact with those markets and how passively you can invest in them on your own without anyone's help and still make a profit. So I find that when people get into crypto or Bitcoin, that kind of opens a door because they're trying to figure this thing out, and to figure it out because you can manage it all yourself, you're coming across all these different terms, open interest and margin and, stop loss, limit orders, deflation, currency emissions, monetary policy. People start paying attention to the Fed, and all of a sudden they're listening to Jackson Hole because they have this vested interest in how does this impact my Bitcoin investment. So it really is kind of a catalyst of financial self-education for a lot of people, and it's so volatile. And a few years ago there wasn't that much information about it. Like 6 years ago it wasn't terribly easy to go find like really digestible, well put together information about Bitcoin. So those people tend to be quite hardcore, like those that had to learn it all themselves. But it really is an industry that encourages people to educate themselves, and people seem to do it with passion. So it's not like they're forced to. Reading stock reports and watching Bloomberg markets is really boring and tiresome, and it's rigorous, right? And it can consume your life, but something about crypto is always interesting.
Well, I think a good metaphor for what you're saying is spot on, by the way. Like I was just saying, what if Bitcoin is a technology that triples the number of people with property rights in my working career alone, which is just crazy to think about. And that's a big part of what I talk about online. We have less in common with the future than the past. But I think a good metaphor for what you're saying is comparing the horse and the locomotive. It's like we live in this ancient world where if you want to transport across land, to buy the horse, breed the horse, raise the horse, feed the horse, it's constant work in order just to be able to go 20 miles. But with the invention of the locomotive, with this more complicated machine, or what seems like a more complicated machine, in irony, it actually makes the world simpler. You don't have to breed a horse and raise a horse for its whole life anymore. You can just buy a ticket to a train station, and that's it. And in the same way with money and Bitcoin, right now we're in this complicated world where we have this global economy. There's 100 different fiat currencies. We have to diversify. We have to get bonds and stocks and gold. We have to do that to offset the decline of the money. Well, if you just add a money that works, all that noise and all that management just goes away. And people ask me, well, why don't financial advisors like Bitcoin? Frankly, at the end of the day, and I know many financial advisors, but the harsh truth is that Bitcoin makes financial advisors basically obsolete. It takes away 80% of their business, because who needs a horse breeder anymore when you can just buy a train ticket? Who need, and people could say, oh, it's a bad thing, but ultimately I think that's a good thing, because we want our money and our savings vehicle to be simple. We don't want it to be complicated, And so right now we're in this complicated world where we have to pay someone 2% a year to manage a mixed basket of goods to offset debasement. And that's the problem I think people are going to realize in coming years, is that my financial advisor is great and helpful and wonderful, with the exception that they don't understand monetary pros and cons. They understand how to offset monetary debasement. And so their one Achilles heel is, what if we find a currency that does not have debasement? That undermines the whole business model.
Hey, finance seems complicated by design. Do you think there's a point where people can be too late to invest in Bitcoin? For example, if price is 150,000 or 300,000 a coin, is it too late? And I'm sure you can give examples, and I can too. So when Bitcoin was 3,000, it was too expensive for my friends and family to invest in it. When Bitcoin was 600, it was too expensive for my friends and family to invest in it. When Bitcoin was 35,000, oh no, it's already higher than its previous all-time high. It's too expensive for me to invest in. Of course, these people are interested in investing in Bitcoin when it was like 55 to 69,000, and then telling me that it's a terrible thing to invest in as it went from 69,000 to 15,000, and then back up to 30,000. But do you foresee in the future, is there some time when it becomes too late to invest in Bitcoin?
No, I don't. Let's start with the principle, and then let's talk about the math. Okay, principle. A closed system is worth infinitely more than an open system. The light bulb as a technology is worth so much more than candlelight. Okay, on a smartphone, you have Google Maps, Apple Maps, or whatever. That technology is worth so much more than physical paper maps that you carry in the back of your car. Because this map you can talk to. This map will tell you every restaurant, the restaurant's hours, the restaurant's website, the restaurant's phone number, and it can give you directions, tell you those directions in real time. Like it could talk to you back. Like the digital maps are worth so much more than the analog maps. Okay, let's take the metaphor of a ship. Okay, if you have, again, let's go back to what financial advisors do. We are in a world where we have 100 different ships sitting out on the water, and they're all sinking at different rates. Some sink faster than others. The peso and the lira and other things fall faster than the dollar, okay? And the dollar falls faster than stocks, okay? And you've got gold. All these investments, securities, commodities, and fiat currencies are ships that are all sinking because they're open systems. They're taking on water, and gravity will do its work, and they'll come down. In the same way with the free market will bring more productivity, and these things will. And so Bitcoin is designed to defend itself against fraud. It's designed to defend itself against attacks, against double spend, against any attack for control of the network. That's what it's designed to do. Bitcoin is good money because it's first designed to be a good self-defense network. Bitcoin's basically like a giant immune system against itself. So it's the ship that just sits there and everything else falls. Well, when is it too late to escape the sinking ships and get onto the floating ship? I mean, when all the ships are half submerged, when they're 90% submerged? What about when they're 99.99% submerged? What about another 10x down in submerges? Okay, what about when they're already underwater? It's like at no point is it illogical to escape the sinking ship and getting onto the floating ship, or if we want to take a lifeboat metaphor, if Titanic, and the Titanic, the mathematical certain is going to sink, when is it ever the wrong time to escape and get onto the lifeboats? Like, okay, you're selling your tickets on the Titanic for the tickets on the lifeboat. It's like, okay, like what? You're going to say, oh, the price of lifeboats has gone up, 1,000x. I'm going to wait for it to come down a bit. It's like, no, that's illogical. You got to get off the ship. Why? Because everyone else on the ship is also thinking the same thing as you. And so someone's going to figure it out before you, and they're going to get their ticket before you do. And that, as dramatic as it is, as a metaphor as it is, that's the reality. The probability of this Titanic submerging is ever increasing, ever advancing. And so at no point does it make sense ever to take profits from your lifeboat back into the Titanic. And at no point is it ever too late for you to exit until already it's completely submerged. And I do warn people of that. It's like, no, it's never too late to buy Bitcoin, but it will be too late to exit bonds. It will be too late to exit fiat.
That pretty much wraps it up. Is there anything you want to tell the audience, all of your followers? If there's something, if you could pick up a megaphone and be the voice of, I don't know, some omnipotent, omnipresent entity and speak into everyone's mind right now, what would you say to them?
Think about the future from the technological lens. Think in exponential terms, and just get off zero. Buy $100 of Bitcoin. Like, if that's all you can afford, if you're paycheck to paycheck, I'd encourage you just $100. Just something that you can sleep at night with. Or if you have a retirement portfolio, like, okay, if you have a 60% bond exposure, is it going to kill you to take 1% of those bonds and buy a Bitcoin? No, it's not.
Yeah. I tell people all the way down to $5 a week, $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever you can afford. And of course, it's not financial advice coming from Luke, I, or Cointelegraph, but I do tell people when they ask me, how do you get your Bitcoins and I just tell them, slow and steady, don't trade, buy it when you can, in amounts that you're comfortable to lose. Don't overextend yourself to where you can't buy groceries or pay your rent, or don't have an emergency fund, or don't enjoy life, i.e. going on a vacation, having a nice meal, getting a nice outfit for yourself. You still need to live life here in the now, but everyone's saving something. So at least try to take a fraction of that savings and put it toward higher volatility assets or higher risk assets or emerging tech assets or even Bitcoin. I saw you wanted to say something.
Well, yeah, I guess just to add that, again, you're stating with the assumption that Bitcoin is a higher risk asset. I would argue it's not. I think Bitcoin is already lower risk than bonds. There is less downside and significantly higher upside. So from an asymmetric trade opportunity, Bitcoin's a better bet than bonds, and I would argue it's lower risk. Okay, again, Does Bitcoin have an 80% chance of failing in the next 12 years? I would argue that many bonds do. So, if you think Bitcoin has at least a 20% chance of survival for the next 12 years, then in many ways, it's probably lower risk than sovereign debt of nations that, you don't trust the politicians already. They're insolvent already. It's like, to me, it's a slam dunk. And people are going to realize that. So anyway, I agree with everything. I want to make Bitcoin because you want to get rich quick. This is not NVIDIA stock. This is not Tesla stock. This is not some GameStop pump and dump meme stock. Okay, this is a different animal. Okay, Bitcoin has higher upside likelihood and possibility because it's the lower risk thing, and therefore will absorb liquidity from everything else. This is not some get rich quick. Oh look, if everyone just buys in. No, this is foremost a security issue, and Bitcoin wins because it's the most secure. So, yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Luke, thanks for coming on. It was a great chat. I think it was action-packed. Some of the most valuable takeaways are that bonds are bust, so reconsider how much you allocate to them. The rules change on a dime because politicians make the rules and they're going to do what's convenient to them. And central bankers are going to do what's convenient to them, or what is profitable to them, or what ensures their survival. And if that means changing the rules as we know them, then that can happen. We've seen that with the haircuts that bond investors have taken during the austerity age in Europe over the last 11 years. Bitcoin is the technology of the future that's going to take over the world, according to Luke. Bitcoiners are apostles spreading the good word of Satoshi, and basically, and right. And it's possible that Jesus might have been a Bitcoiner himself if Bitcoin existed in his time. So if you're listening to this episode, those are all alpha bombs that Luke dropped today. Where can people find you if they want to follow you and hear more of your unique perspectives on the economy and Bitcoin?
They can find me on Twitter, Luke Broyles, Broyles. They can find me on YouTube under the same name. I'm just starting at the Bitcoin Advisor, which is an Australian company that provides collateral custody solutions. Basically, they provide hand-holding education step-by-step for people. That's open to anyone in the world. So you can find me there. Just look up the Bitcoin Advisor with an E, and then you can work with me directly there. Or if you want schedule coaching, consulting call, whatever, I also have that available as well. So people can find lots of free content, lots of paid content, whatever people want. I'm just trying to my worldview with as many people as possible. So yeah, Twitter, YouTube, Bitcoin Advisor, and then consulting. People can find me those 4 places.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate you sharing some time with us today, and thanks. It was a great chat.
Thank you. Appreciate it.